On Saturday, April 5, 1997, the dispatcher of the Las Vegas, Nevada Rescue Service answered a call from a distressed man who reported the disappearance of his wife. The man, identified as Mark Hollinger, explained that his wife's name was Ginger Rios. They had been married for only 5 months and had just moved into a new house. Yesterday, they were shopping for their new home when Ginger entered a store and seemed to vanish into thin air. The police began an investigation. Detectives had never heard of a person disappearing so mysteriously, even in a city with its share of sins. They couldn't even begin to imagine how unusual this case would turn out to be, where you think you know exactly what happened, but it turns out you don't, and you have to start all over again. 20-year-old Ginger Rios lived and worked in Las Vegas. Her parents, George and Denise, adored their daughters, Ginger and her younger sister, Daniela. The girls grew up surrounded by attention and care. Since childhood, Ginger dreamt of performing on stage, and she was fortunate to be born in Las Vegas because by the age of 20, she became a member of a successful group that performed in casino hotels. She also met a man named Mark Hollinger, who was 14 years older than her. Mark treated Ginger exceptionally well. He supported her in everything, and soon the young couple decided to legalize their relationship. In November 1996, when Ginger was only 20 and Mark was 34, they tied the knot. Some considered their union unusual because Ginger was a cheerful extrovert, while Mark was a quiet introvert. But they complemented each other perfectly and were already planning how to build their family nest. In the spring of 1997, Ginger found an amazing house available for rent with an option to buy. The house had a spacious basement, and Ginger could already imagine turning it into a dance studio. She liked the house so much that she dreamed of eventually purchasing it. However, to realize this dream, she and Mark needed a positive credit history. They needed a clear plan for how they would manage their finances, and for this purpose, Ginger wanted to buy books with relevant recommendations. In the city, a shop was gaining popularity that sold exactly the kind of books Ginger was looking for. It had a quirky name, Spy Shop. It was like a candy store for adults. In addition to books, its shelves held lockpicks, hidden surveillance cameras, police badges, car alarms, glasses that transmitted images, and even tools for removing store security tags from clothing. It was conveniently located in the city center. And so, on Friday, April 4th, literally the day after the young couple had moved into their new home, they went shopping, including for books. Around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, Mark parked directly in front of the entrance. Ginger told her husband to wait in the car, and she took her wallet, which had some cash and her identification, and went inside. Mark expected her to come out very quickly, but he managed to finish his cigarette, and she still hadn't appeared. Thinking she might be waiting in line, he waited a little longer and then decided to check on his wife. The shop was small enough that he immediately realized Ginger was not there. He asked the man and woman behind the counter if they had seen Ginger and described her, of course. They replied that she had just come in, bought 2 books, and left. They added that she couldn't have gone far. Mark was surprised, but decided to look around in other stores, thinking maybe she needed to buy something else. He went into each one and asked if anyone had seen a slender brunette, but no one had seen her. His amazement knew no bounds. The car was parked right in front of the entrance. She couldn't have just slipped past it. Ginger had simply disappeared in broad daylight. Not knowing what else to do, Mark went to his wife's parents. Ginger's father, George, immediately thought that if there were surveillance cameras in any store, it would certainly be in the Spy Shop. They might be able to see at least which direction she went after leaving the store, since this shop not only stood out for its unique items, but also closed earlier. Compared to other places in Vegas, Mark and George hurried back in the hope that the storekeeper hadn't left yet. Unfortunately, the shop was closed, but Mark managed to identify the man and the woman getting into a van with a baby. They approached and explained the situation. The man introduced himself as John Flowers and claimed ownership of the shop. He explained that he and his wife were already planning to leave before the weekend, so they had closed the doors and activated the alarm. To avoid traffic, they needed to hurry. He would be happy to show them any video on Monday. Mark and George were extremely frustrated, but didn't want to cause a traffic jam for a family with a small child. The men returned home, deciding that if the young woman didn't show up by evening or night, they would contact the police in the morning. As soon as the sun rose, Mark called 911. Detective Jeff Rosgen was assigned to the case, and of course, he began the investigation by trying to learn more about the girl's life before her disappearance. Her life appeared very happy. Her parents and sister genuinely loved her. She had gotten married just 5 months ago, had recently moved into a new home, and her career was on the rise. It seemed like there was no reason for her to run away. Or was there? Could there be something no one knew about? What if in the shop, she didn't buy financial books but something else that helped her disappear? George recalled how his daughter had mentioned going to that same shop just a few weeks ago. However, he couldn't remember her talking about anything unusual or making a purchase while she was there. Her family concluded that she must have been somehow abducted. But how could this be accomplished in such a short span of time without her screaming or calling for help? Did this indicate that she knew her abductor? After her disappearance, the young woman did not use her credit cards or withdraw her latest paycheck. This suggested that she likely didn't vanish willingly. The detective also spoke with the girl's friends and colleagues, who saw Ginger's life quite differently. First, the girl was not as thrilled with the progress in her career as it might have seemed. She believed that by this point, she should have had a solo career, rather than performing as a backup vocalist. Secondly, she didn't like the persistent advances and even harassment from some strangers who saw her on stage. Thirdly, she had to take weight loss pills, which caused significant mood swings. Finally, her marriage wasn't going smoothly, to the extent that she had spent some time living in a hotel to avoid going home. Detective Rosgen had heard enough and suspected that Mark was hiding something. However, Mark's story had never changed. He had no apparent motive to harm his wife, and Ginger's parents insisted that suspecting Mark was a waste of time and resources. But the investigation had no other leads. Everyone had only heard Mark's story. Of course, the shop owner confirmed that the girl had made purchases, but could anyone be sure that Ginger didn't return to the car before Mark did something to her? Mark desperately hoped that his wife had simply run away. It hurt his pride, but at least it meant she was safe. He even tried to conduct his own investigation, questioning people and, with George, searching the city for Ginger or any leads. On one hand, Mark was Ginger's husband. He loved her, and he certainly devoted every free minute to searching for her. But detectives saw this as an attempt to divert suspicion from himself. Indeed, any leads that Mark found didn't amount to much, unlike the police's next lead, which pointed directly at Mark. In the parking lot of a local shopping center, the patrol officers found a burning car, which turned out to be Mark's car. How did he explain this? He didn't know. He simply returned from work when the engine started making strange noises, so he left the car in the parking lot and went home in a taxi. In other words, the likely crime scene, if Mark had indeed done something to Ginger, was on fire, and the police had to consider it a coincidence. Nonetheless, forensic experts took the car for analysis, although it would take some time. The detectives had spent too much time focusing on Mark and decided to start the investigation over, from the place where someone other than her husband had last seen her. The owner of Spy Shop, John Flowers, wasn't present at the moment, but one of his employees allowed the police to look around. They didn't conduct a full search, but they did walk through all the rooms. Detective Jeff Rosgen didn't find anything unusual in the store itself, but when he entered the storeroom, he was almost knocked off his feet by the strong smell of bleach. On the wall, he noticed a tiny reddish-brown spot that could have been blood. They decided to take it for analysis just in case. Rosgen got in touch with John Flowers to inform him that the police had visited his store. John was quite surprised that they hadn't found the girl yet, but readily answered all the questions. He explained that the bleach smell in the storeroom was because his dog used it as a toilet, and he had to clean up after it frequently. It was possible that's how a tiny drop of blood ended up there. As for the surveillance camera footage and the receipts for the book purchases, he would need to come to the store to look for them and hand them over to the police. Rosgen asked about the books Ginger bought, and this is where the surprise came in. One book was about creating a new identity, and the other was about contract killers. But why did Ginger buy these? Did she genuinely intend to disappear? Or did someone force her to buy these books and then kill her in one of the ways described in the second book? The tiny spot on the wall, possibly blued, turned out to be too small for analysis. Nevertheless, it wasn't very important since everyone already knew Ginger had been in the store and left. What was much more critical was figuring out where she went afterward. Indeed, there were several possible leads, especially considering Ginger's striking beauty and her public performances. Many people, including those with bad intentions, could have noticed her. Moreover, her father worked as a dealer in one of the most popular casinos in Vegas. When it comes to money, things can get messy. Days turned into weeks, and the hope of finding the girl alive was dwindling. The answer regarding Mark's car came, and guess what? They found nothing. No blood, no signs of struggle, nothing at all. At this point, Rosgen thought of John Flowers. He considered the possibility of checking the surveillance camera footage to see if someone had approached Ginger at the store's exit. However, he was too late. Exclaiming, "Where have you been all this time, guys?" John explained that he had reviewed the footage, saw Ginger entering the store, choosing the books, paying in cash, and leaving. Since no one had come for the video, it had been overwritten with new footage from the surveillance camera. John also couldn't find the receipt for the books, although he was certain that it should be somewhere. After this, John seemed unwilling to cooperate further with the detective, partly because his business had suffered due to police, media, and curious onlookers who crowded his shop after Ginger's disappearance. Selling lockpicks and fake police badges in a store that was already filled with law enforcement paraphernalia was understandable, but it put immense pressure on his small business. Rosgen understood this, and there was nothing to push John into talking with them. The case was put on the back burner, and the police had no new leads. In fact, the truth was there, but the detectives working on Ginger's case wouldn't discover it until several more months passed. On May 5th, in the Mojave Desert, nearly 400 miles from Vegas, a group of hunters stumbled upon a shallow grave. The medical examiner determined that the body in the grave belonged to a young, dark-haired girl aged 15 to 18. She had no identification on her, but the killer hadn't taken her quite distinctive jewelry, a pink ring with 3 colored stones and another ring shaped like wire loops, intertwined to form the letter M or W. Could the M signify Mark? Or perhaps it was a family heirloom, because Ginger's mother's maiden name was Watersworth. Hoping for public assistance, the local police published photos of the jewelry, but it would be a very long time before they would learn the truth. In the meantime, to crack the case, the detectives needed a lead or a body. Suddenly, on August 16, 1997, Jeff Rosgen received an unexpected phone call. The caller identified himself as a federal agent from Arizona and claimed to have a lead on the Ginger case. Rosgen was intrigued. The agent explained that John Flowers had been accused of selling illegal eavesdropping devices. But what did this have to do with Ginger? The agent continued. John had gone on the run because he didn't want to be arrested, but his wife, Cheryl Cizone, had been brought in for questioning. They were interested in her husband's whereabouts, but suddenly she started talking about Ginger Rios, who had disappeared in Vegas several months ago. The agent left the room to make a call to Rosgen. It was only now that Rosgen realized he had never formally questioned the owner of the spy shop, the last place Ginger was seen. And yet, Ginger's husband had mentioned that there was a man and a woman behind the counter. Rosgen asked the agents not to let Cheryl out of their sight and hurried to Arizona. Rosgen couldn't have anticipated what Cheryl's interrogation would reveal. When Ginger entered the shop to browse for books, John Flowers turned to Cheryl and asked her to go buy film. This wasn't unusual, as she often ran errands when they worked together at the store. Cheryl returned after about 10 minutes, and that's when Mark walked in. John told Mark that his wife had just left and couldn't have gone far. Mark thanked them and left. Cheryl's husband seemed like a different person. He had a terrified look on his face. She asked him what was going on, and the man replied, "I did something terrible. Whatever you do, don't go into the storage room." Cheryl had no idea what he meant. and it never occurred to her that her husband had harmed someone. However, his behavior unsettled her, and a little while later, she decided to check the storage room. Inside, she found the lifeless body of a young girl with a pool of blood surrounding her head. The carpet was also soaked in blood. The girl had been brutally beaten. It was the same girl who had entered the shop before John had sent Cheryl to get film. Cheryl felt disgusted, but her disgust quickly turned into fear when she realized John was right behind her. She hadn't even turned around when he grabbed her by the neck and ordered her never to speak about what had happened there, or something bad would happen to her as well as their child. Cheryl obeyed his command, but now that John was on the run, she decided to tell the truth. The detective wanted to know how John explained the situation to Cheryl. John told her that Ginger had a note from two of his former employees who were demanding money. Supposedly, the contents of the note and Ginger's insolence had infuriated John, and he had hit her so hard in the face that she fell back, hit her head, and died. However, Cheryl was convinced that this was a lie, and she had never seen the note. She did know for sure that John had taken garbage bags and spent several hours in the storage room, wrapping the girl's body in plastic bags and pouring bleach around her. He had told the employee that the dog had used the room as a restroom. Then, he put the body in his van and told Cheryl they needed to leave for Arizona immediately. That's when Ginger's father and husband approached them and pleaded for them to show the surveillance camera footage. John and Cheryl looked them in the eyes and lied, even though Ginger was lying just inches away from them. But that's not all. Cheryl also knew where her husband had buried the body. You see, they had gone to the Mojave Desert several times, John and Cheryl together. One time, John left Cheryl in the middle of nowhere and drove off with their baby and the girl's body. It's clear that he buried her, returned for Cheryl, and drove home. But this wasn't enough for him. They went to that location several more times so John could hide the shallow grave under a layer of concrete. It was only the last time that John came running back, panicked and screaming, "They found her! They found her!" So Cheryl was quite certain that the police had already discovered Ginger's body. In any case, she agreed to show the detectives the location in exchange for no charges being filed against her. They accepted her offer because they didn't believe Cheryl had been involved in the murder. She led them to the spot. When they arrived in the desert, the local officers started connecting the dots between the body found by hunters in May and Cheryl's revelation. Cheryl asked them to stop the car and led them to the place her husband had visited. The police expected to find an empty grave, but instead, they reached a concrete slab that appeared untouched. There, they discovered the body wrapped in plastic bags. Thanks to a tattoo on the lower back, they had a preliminary identification as Ginger, but they decided to wait for DNA analysis before informing her family. This raised several unanswered questions. Were there two victims? Did John kill both? If so, why and who was the second girl? Now they could secure a search warrant for the Vegas store where they found traces of Ginger's blood. The DNA analysis later confirmed that the body in the desert also belonged to her. Mark, who had clung to the hope that his wife had simply left and started a new life, was devastated. He blamed himself, thinking he should have gone to the store with her. But how could he have imagined that a complete stranger, the owner of a popular and frequently visited store, would attack his wife, someone who was a mother and his loving spouse? John's attempt to hide didn't last long, and he was arrested at a hotel in Los Angeles. The extradition process began, during which the detectives discovered that there was no John Flowers, the owner of the Spy Stores chain. Instead, there was a 26-year-old Craig Jacobson wanted for crimes committed in Florida. From the age of 10, the boy had struggled with mental health issues, suffering from paranoia, borderline personality disorder, and likely antisocial personality disorder. He spent a year in a mental health clinic and then served 30 months in prison, followed by 3 years of probation. However, in 1995, he disappeared. In his place, John emerged. In addition to this revelation, the police found another potential victim of John or Craig. 2 months prior, a teenage girl had entered the Vegas store, but before she could even browse the merchandise, the owner approached her, slung her over his shoulder, and carried her into the storeroom without uttering a word. Her luck was incredible because another customer entered the store and scared John Flowers away, so he released her. This young woman didn't report the incident to the police out of fear, and her word against the word of a respected businessman could have been problematic. This, of course, was before the truth about John came to light. In the following months, psychiatrists examined him multiple times and deemed him unfit to stand trial. The prosecutor was convinced that Craig was faking it, but feared that the crime might go unpunished. He explained to Ginger's family that the best option would be to offer him a plea deal. Craig agreed to plead guilty to the murder, and he was sentenced to 25 years in prison before he could be eligible for parole. As for the other girl, Craig mentioned her name as Mary Stoddard. She was the 18-year-old daughter of a chiropractor who had come to Vegas when he kidnapped and killed her. Ginger Rios's relatives hoped that he would be charged with Mary's murder, which could at least result in a life sentence or possibly even the death penalty. But here's the catch. Mary Stoddard, the daughter of a chiropractor as described by Craig, was alive and well. The body of the unidentified girl had already been reburied, but they had previously created a 3D model of what she might have looked like and obtained a DNA sample. This was all the police had, because as it unexpectedly turned out, the documents with information about her place of burial were lost, and no one knew in which grave she was located. In simpler terms, they had lost the body. Nevertheless, the police didn't give up on trying to identify who she was. In their list of missing persons, there were 300 people. Finally, on June 30th, 2010, after 13 years, they managed to identify the girl. More precisely, she turned out to be a teenage girl, as it was 15-year-old Christina Mary Martinez from Phoenix, Arizona. The girl lived in a group home, but constantly ran away from it because she was treated poorly there. She disappeared on May 3, 1997, while carrying a load of laundry to a self-service laundromat. Her path led her past the Spy Shop in Phoenix. Despite her difficult childhood, Christina had many people who loved her and were looking for her, including her friend Valerie, who never stopped searching for her. Valerie created various social media profiles in an attempt to draw attention to Christina's disappearance. Valerie would say, "No matter how long it takes, I will never stop thinking about her, and I won't give up. For me, she's not just a case number. I loved her. That's true love, never giving up on finding someone." Valerie couldn't have known that Christina was found just a week after her disappearance, in the desert, on her 16th birthday. As for the mystery of the girl's ring, the letter M on it signifies Martinez. Interestingly, the sister of the real Mary Stoddard mentioned that Craig had dated Mary when they were both younger. The guy was already behaving strangely back then, and if this is true, he could have become so fixated on Mary that after parting ways with her, he always sought women who resembled her to vent his anger. Considering that Mary is alive, but Craig called Christina Mary, it's possible that this was a fantasy he played out in his head while committing the crime, as many killers, especially serial killers, do. Most likely, Craig didn't plan his crimes but succumbed to impulsive acts, as was the case with the teenage girl from Vegas who survived because another customer scared the killer away. It's also possible that he targeted victims. As we know, Ginger had been to the store before her disappearance. Craig never revealed the reasons for his behavior, but investigators believe the murders aimed at violence against women because Ginger's underwear was found around her ankles. In any case, now, thanks to being charged with a second murder, he will spend the rest of his life in prison. It's remarkable that Craig was able to deceive so many people so easily. Mark and George, who were searching for Ginger, his own wife, Cheryl, who had no inkling of his hidden nature, and even experienced Vegas police officers who had seen much in their careers. He truly appeared like an ordinary family man, and it makes you wonder where one can feel safe, if not with a store owner standing behind the counter with his wife and baby.